Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee a Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episodes are Season 2, Episode 11, or Episode 31 overall, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3, and Squirrel Jokes, both of which originally premiered on September 14th, 2001. And I'm very excited for this edition of SpongeComs because it now means that I am more than halfway through the original 3-season run of SpongeBob SquarePants, and that's just amazing. I didn't know I'd make it this far, actually, but I'm very happy to keep going because there's still some really good episodes after this that I do want to commentate over. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3 might just be the first episode to start with the title card immediately appearing, and instead of fading in and out, it's just a quick screen. And it also has some pretty bad dot crawl problems on the DVD. I don't know how common this is for SpongeBob episodes on DVD, but when you get the basic sets like Hide and Seek or Nautical Nonsense, they will generally have dot crawl issues, which for some reason also means that the colors are more in line with how they look on TV. I guess that's sort of the price you have to pay. SpongeBob's coloring isn't that bad in this episode. So, anyway, this episode was written by Paul Tibbett, Walt Dawn, and Meriwether Williams, and you can really tell that Paul Tibbett had a hand in this because he wrote the first Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode, and he would have had a hand in the second one as well. He's very in tune with these characters. And something that strikes me as odd about this episode compared to the other pre-movie Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes is that they themselves only appear for a minute and a half in person. Other times they're just mentioned. And this is their only appearance in Season 2, so don't have much of a presence this year, but what can you do? But the interesting thing about this episode is that it manages to build their lore anyway, because SpongeBob and Patrick have the Man Cave, parody of the Bat Cave, all to themselves, and they just geek out about all the past episodes that they've seen and all the gadgets and the Orb of Confusion and the Tickle Belt. And I think that goes a long way in making it a more believable thing within this world, that they have this big place filled with contraptions and stuff. I think we got a small glimpse of it in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, but now we know what their hideout was like in the show, and that's a good feeling. So yeah, I really like the Mermalair. I think it was a nice location for this episode to take place. And this is also the first appearance of probably Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's greatest foe. Dirty Bubble has some competition, but Man Ray just kills it. He is one of the best villains in the show, period, and one of the few who isn't green. I noticed that a lot of the times when a villain turns up on SpongeBob, it's green or brown with this dingy color, but Man Ray is bright, he's colorful, and that's the exact opposite of his personality, and that's why we love him so much. And he was voiced by guest star John Rhys Davies, an Irish actor, I believe, who also played Gimli in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Peter Jackson one, so he's been down here. I think he liked it. I mean, he didn't like the prosthetics and all, but what can you do? However, sometimes the credits for this episode accidentally say that Man Ray was voiced by this person called Guy Siner, who's probably the only actor on the planet who's done stuff for Star Trek, Doctor Who, and Seinfeld, which is an amazing array of stuff, an amazing resume. And here we've got probably the biggest hurdle in Man Ray getting to wreak villainy again after the frozen tartar sauce It's the old tickle belt as seen in episode 17, and I like how this is basically torture. SpongeBob and Patrick are torturing this poor, defenseless villain. However, it's about the silliest way of doing it possible. Like, it isn't shock therapy or anything, but it's very close. It is about vibrations and all that. And we also get a lot of neato fan servicey shots of it tickling his waist if you're into that sort of thing. And yeah, almost everything Man Ray says pretty much steals the show. And yeah, not a whole lot of super secret fun facts about this episode, but it is still a very entertaining and very funny episode. It is one of my favorite earlier Mermaid Man episodes. I think it's only beat out by the 4th, maybe the 5th as well, but gotta check my sources on that. And it is also probably one of the most famous of Patrick's endless comic routines, the wallet that he does not know that he has. And I like to think that this isn't just a goodness exercise to make sure that Man Ray is compassionate about someone losing their wallet, but also knowing how to tolerate someone who is a complete moron like Patrick. That is the sign of a good person in SpongeBob, if they can tolerate Patrick, honestly. Very odd thing about this episode, though, is that Man Ray is reconstituted at the end, or redeemed, reformed, reboot, rehash, recast, if you will. But this is the only episode for a while that really buys into that, because he's evil again in the 5th Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, and then he's just doing laundry every single time we see him after this, and then on vacation. So I have no idea what happened in 5. I don't know why he turned back to villainy for that. Maybe Barnacle Man was just so convincing. I also do really like the idea of SpongeBob and Patrick being such good souls and so chipper about the Mermaid Man franchise that they will try to reform one of his deadliest adversaries and actually succeed without their help. That's what separates this from most of the other early Mermaid Man episodes, is that SpongeBob actually does save the day in a way. I mean, Man Ray is sort of doing it for himself as well, bettering himself. I mean, say what you will about Patrick going a bit overboard with the laughter, the tickle belt. That's another thing. The laughter song is amazing. I think that if you search it up on YouTube, it's just called Laughter, and it is the most uncanny song that you can write up, and it fits perfectly for a comic supervillain being rehabilitated, if you really want to use that term. I think if there is a little nugget of disappointment that I have in this episode, is that when they do cosplay as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, SpongeBob and Patrick don't do a whole lot. They just kind of knock themselves out with the Orb of Confusion. I mean, they wouldn't have succeeded anyhow. I think that's where I'm coming from. But it's all but forgiven when Man Ray does turn to the good side on his own, with the little chicks with the little poodles on them. And to this day, I think that's still the most liked tweet I have on my SpongeBob quote of the day thing. Him pointing out his little chick with the little poodle on it. I don't know if it's bid out the tribute to Tim Conway, but either way, people do really love these episodes, and there's a reason why. SpongeBob isn't really known for superhero... Well, it's not really known for parody, but it does superhero parody really, really well. a lot of cartoons in the 90s and 2000s did it really well, even before comic book movies went mainstream. And that is very bizarre that it was this thing that the baby boom generation could make fun of with the same sort of wit and intelligence as blockbuster movies. I know that sounds weird, but what else can I say about it? Oh, and this is also the very first appearance of the first nautical bank of Bikini Bottom. I didn't know that it first appeared this late into the game, but that is a fun little factoid if you really like the gag in Doing Time, or if you really like Safe Deposit Crabs, and didn't like how they got rid of the first nautical bank for that episode, but hey. I mean, the scene in this episode is just incredible. It looks like, because he's laughing all the time, it looks like Man Ray is doing this as some sort of prank, like he's not taking this seriously, but yeah. Really fun episode all the way around. And it ends with a pretty good joke of Patrick being so dumb that the Orb of Confusion doesn't really affect him that much. Either that, or it's hard for him to get out of the trance, the confused trance that it causes. But, yeah. It's kind of coincidental that this is the halfway point of the pre-movie era of SpongeBob, when this is the halfway point of the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy saga, and the only one in season 2. But I still do really like it. It's one of the best ones that I think they've ever put out. And there's a good reason for that. It's aged pretty well, and it's a really great time all around, even if you don't really care about supervillains and all that. And now we're on to Squirrel Jokes, which was directed by Paul Tibbett and Walt Dawn, and written by them as well, alongside Meriwether Williams. This is the first episode to have 2 animation directors, Larry Likelitter and Leonard Robinson. I don't know if having more or less animation directors can negatively impact a production, but this is one of the more controlled episodes that I've seen of season 2 so far. Like, the wacky faces do come and go at a very natural pace. Not saying that wacky faces were a problem back in the day, but you know what I mean. It is very well directed as an episode. And it's also a very harsh episode, which is probably one of the reasons why it's one of the less liked episodes from this period today, but I'll still stand by it. It's still a really amazing SpongeBob episode in that it looks at comedy and makes jokes about specifically offensive comedy in a way that paints it as a bad thing, but can still derive joy from it. And I really like how it's all started by this sort of comedy club thing that the Krusty Krab is doing. I think that really helps out the atmosphere of this episode, because this was coming at a time when comedy, like stand-up comedy, was getting more racy, and comedy in the media in general was getting racier. I mean, Seinfeld had just left TV, but it was still in the zeitgeist, and even that was kind of tame compared to what other comedians were doing at the time, so yeah, might as well throw SpongeBob into this trend, see how he fares offending his friends on stage. And it's also kind of an allegory for prejudice in comedy. Like, you can have, like, friendly pokes at it here and there, but outright insulting other cultures, other genders, other races, that's what SpongeBob eventually starts doing, and it really does hurt Sandy. And, yeah, despite that, I still think that this episode is very wise in a way. It still always knows what it's talking about, and although these jokes are structured in a comical way, it knows that they're not very appropriate, even for 2000 and 2001. This was the last episode to be produced or copyrighted in 2000, and I think that's why people thought it aired that year for a very long time, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense. And the great thing is, even though this episode knows where it's banking from, it still has a lot of great jokes, like SpongeBob making up a lame pun here. And I think that this is the only episode, to my knowledge, for a while at least, where SpongeBob is wearing a bow tie through most of it instead of his usual necktie. And I think that's just to accentuate that he's a funnyman upstage, but it looks good on him. It makes him look more dorky, actually. Yeah, it does really look good on him. Don't know why. But yeah, this is, as I've said in an earlier video, this is on the Tom 20, that top 20 list that Tom Kenny, voice of SpongeBob, made. And this was number 18 on that list, so he likes it, and it is very personal to him. He does say on the thing that, in the description of the download, that he was part of the comedy scene in the early 80s, and he had to learn to toe the line and understand how far was too far, just like SpongeBob. So this episode does correlate to his evolution in comedy, so I think that really helped out SpongeBob's performance here, because in later episodes where SpongeBob gets famous, he does get very cocky almost immediately, while here it's more of a gradual thing. He's got an audience to entertain, but he still doesn't know. He still can't exactly read how Sandy's feeling about this, which, yeah, it's not like SpongeBob's just being callous, it's just he doesn't know much better. Which I think is a valid thing to teach kids, is that they probably don't know much better when they quote what they see on late night TV and just assume it's funny because it's funny. And I'll stop being preachy and all that. However, it is a theme that runs through this episode, and it does need to be further discussed and not just blown or brushed under the bed because it's a bit mean. I mean, it's about being mean. I can totally get it. And as for Sandy's involvement in this plot, I do really like how, although they do play into her role as an outsider, she's still very, very clearly a friend to SpongeBob, and is sort of wanting him to be better and more tactful in his comedic act, now that she's on the receiving end of it. And I do really like that, how she is a girl, even though most of the audience is male, and she's also from another place, which is quite easy for these fish to make fun of. And I'll get to that in a bit, but otherwise I do really like this bit of SpongeBob trying out different comedic approaches, like the rubber chicken. Surprisingly, his hand puppet in season 11 really did like using that thing. And really weird thing I read somewhere is that apparently in the Indonesian dub of this episode, they don't call... The jokes aren't about how stupid she is, they're about how ugly she is, which is its own brand of mean, but you can't say stupid in some kids' shows in some places. So, I don't know. As for exactly how the solutions to these plot points are handled, they are very bizarre in a way, and I could see some reused animation from earlier on in the episode with all the fish jumping around. So, anyway, we're entering the third act and solutions are supposed to come into play. And since this is a TV show and it's 2001, we can't just say, make your jokes nicer. You can't just say that. This is the year of Freddy Got Fingered, for goodness sake. And I can see this as being the reason why people don't like this episode, in that it's not supposed to be a super delicate solution. However, it's a funny one. It's got good comedic timing and build up and payoff and stuff. But again, your mileage may vary. I do really like this episode, but every time I watch it, I can kind of get why it goes too far in some cases. It is just personal preference. Now, the first solution is this bit where Sandy plays into the stereotypes that SpongeBob is putting on stage and just presenting herself in a way that makes her look repulsive and unfriendly to SpongeBob. And I guess the message she's bashing into SpongeBob is that I am not like this, I am not those stereotypes, or else you would not like me. I guess that's what she's trying to say, but she ends up almost killing her friend in the process. I mean, it's not taken as far as in Tea at the Tree Dome. Like, SpongeBob's eyes aren't that small yet. And it just goes to town and being very weird and silly, which is why I'm not super worried about it being a bit harsh. Again, I sound like I'm defending this episode, but really I'm just pointing out the reasons you might not want to watch it. But again, 20 years of hindsight. This episode's turning 20 this year. Goodness gracious. But the other solution to this problem, I think, is handled a bit better. It's got a bit more appeal, and that's SpongeBob taking shots at everyone, including himself, evening the playing field, as it were. And yeah, I do like some of those jabs he makes at fish, how they swim in the ocean a lot, but they're still a bit odorous. But I think that the bit of him making fun of sponges and then bits of him making fun at crabs and starfish, that is very nice. Like, those are the sorts of jokes that you'd want to write for a sea-based show. And plus, the characters are not offended by it at all, because SpongeBob isn't really insulting them, he's just making playful jabs at them. Of course, this is 2001, maybe an episode like this would go very, very differently today. However, it is definitely worth being a time capsule of how we treated comedy back then, and I think that it's held up in some regard. Plus, it's still a very fun SpongeBob and Sandy episode that really plays into a ironic fish out of water placement in the show. So I do really like both of these episodes. They're not my top favorites of the season. I mean, Mermaid 3 comes close, and Squirrel Jokes is one I ranked pretty high back in the day. But yeah, I do really like them all the same. As for my question of the week last week, would you attend a SpongeCom? Overwhelmingly, you guys said that, yeah, of course you'd go, if it weren't for COVID, that is. And my question of the week for you this week is, who is your favourite Mermaid Man villain? Because there are plenty to choose from. You've got Dirty Bubble, you've got Man Ray, you've got Barnacle Man, if you want to count him, and you've got the Moth thing, played by Mark Hamill. You've got plenty of those to choose from, so it's a rogues gallery worth looking into and picking out your absolute favourite, whether it be by personality, by design, by their catchphrases, and I'll see you next time where the pressure is on in Pressure and the Smoking Peanut. Goodbye for now.